Hello everyone, welcome to Changemaker Academy. Now, we've all seen or been part of incredible protests, petition signings, demonstrations, or even civil disobedience that has changed the world. But this is such a tricky concept to get right. What is it that takes an ordinary protest into a game changer, that shifts the momentum for your campaign and really impacts society? My name is Carl Andreasen, and this is week 4 of our ongoing series on how to build up your campaign strategy. This week we're talking about tactics, which is my favorite subject and is the most fun part of any campaign, is how you tell your story. But we've all been part of protests or petition signatures or manifestations that didn't go anywhere, that we didn't have the people in power listen to us or shift their opinion. To help us overcome this difficulty, we're asking Philip Wheeler from the Climate Justice Program to come in and talk to us about action logic and how to build more powerful, more impactful actions using the action planning star.
Hello everybody, welcome to week 4. It's great that you're joining us for this next part of your journey through an introduction to using actions and campaigning. This week we're going to be focusing on tactics. Last week you heard a little bit about how to plan the strategy of your campaign, and now we're going to look at some of the tools that you will use to bring that campaign to life. If there was just one thing, if there was only one thing that I could tell you guys that you need to remember in order to produce fantastic actions and to produce fantastic campaigns, it would be this phrase: action logic. Action logic, action logic, action logic is the phrase that you need to remember. Action logic is a very, very simple concept. Have you ever looked at a protest and wondered, what are those guys doing? Why are they there? If you have had that thought, you had a thought about action logic, because you have been wondering how what they are doing links to what they want. Action logic is if somebody from the outside can look at your protest or intervention as part of your campaign and immediately grasp why you are doing what you are doing, then you have very strong action logic. I think the best way for us to start thinking about action logic is probably to look at some really good examples of strong action logic and some examples where the action logic perhaps wasn't so strong. So let's go back into history just a little bit. You've probably heard of the civil rights movement and a fantastic campaign that went on, a big movement that went on for years in the US, started in the 50s and went throughout the 60s, that was campaigning for equal rights for people who had darker skin. One of the things that is a very, very famous tactic that was used during those protests is a tactic that was called the lunch counter protests, where people with darker skin and people with lighter skin were not allowed to eat next to each other in certain restaurants. So what the campaign decided to do was to prepare people with lighter skin and with darker skin to sit next to each other and eat together. And that was illegal. That was against the law of some of the states at that time. And so just by doing the thing that they were not allowed to do, they were very clearly highlighting the injustice. And I think if you can look at the photos, you'll see it's immediately obvious why they are doing what they are doing. And that's, for me, a really clear case of action logic. Another really great case of action logic would be any action that you can see where the protesters are immediately in the right place for the thing that they're protesting against. If you can see a bunch of protesters standing outside a nuclear power plant and they have a big sign that says "No nuclear," that's very clear action logic. They're in the right place and you know exactly why they're there. They have a sign. It could be in any language because you know what the nuclear sign is, and you know if you put a strike through that, then you're standing against it. It's a very simple way to get your message across, and it tells the story very directly. Great action logic as far as I'm concerned. Let's have a look at this protest. I don't know if you can see the thing that's most obvious in this protest to me is the guy with the gun, and he's pointing the gun at some protesters in a boat. This is a Greenpeace protest in 2013 where a bunch of really peaceful activists were going to go and sit on the side of an oil rig. And the image that we're taking in here is the first image that comes up when we try and look at the internet, look through the internet for that protest. And it's an image of a gun being pointed at a protester. And if that image is the image that we take away from that protest, it's very difficult for us to tell the story of why they were there and the destruction of the climate and the destruction of our entire planet, which is ultimately what that protest was about. However, when we look back at it, what we see is the gun. We see that moment of confrontation. And that very much detracts from the message. The message is not therefore about the massive existential threat to all life on the planet. It is instead about, look at the way that the legal authorities have come to interact with the protesters. So when we are starting to look at how to escalate our tactics and we're considering the response of the authorities, then consider that the response of the authorities can completely hijack the message that you have or that you're intending to have with your action logic. I think, for what it's worth, from my perspective, the action logic of going to climb on the very first drilling rig in the Arctic Circle is very strong. It's a very clear protest, or it would have been, if that intervention hadn't happened. And it's very easy for protests to get lost under the repression from state authorities. So it's great to try and see that coming if you can. So here's a photo of a big crowd. We don't really know what's happening in that crowd. At least when I look at this crowd, we can't see very clearly who it is that is the target of this protest. It's thousands of people. It could be really in any country. It could be in any city. So, however, this is one of those could be taken either way kind of photos, because if you have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people gathering together at the same time, that's enough of a story in itself to make it through into public consciousness. But I would still provide a note of caution here, which is that when people do look back on those images, it's nice to be able to link back why you were all there as quickly as possible. So if you are trying to get a large crowd together, and that is a tactic that you go for, then it's definitely worth considering how you're going to show the cause and keep that action logic as close as possible. So that's a few examples of action logic, some that work, and of course, this is all just my opinion. You need to try and work out the action logic for yourself and for your group as clearly as you can. So this is a really useful tool. When you have your campaign, you know who your target is, and you're trying to work out what to do in order to reach that target, then this is called the Action Star. It's a document that you're going to use in your exercises after the class. And it's a really comprehensive way of looking at all of the different elements of a tactic and building a tactic. So firstly, really simply, what's the target? Who are you talking to, and who are you aiming at? At what point in the cycle of the target are we intervening? Like, where is this person or this target in their journey? Are they building up to a conference? Have they already made a decision? Where in the journey of the campaign is this target, and how do we intervene with him at that point in his journey or her journey? Another really great thing to consider when we're looking at the action star is this thing which is called the spectrum of allies. And here's a quick photo of the spectrum of allies. You've got the guys that are on your side and they're actively helping you in your campaign. You've got the guys that are next to that who support you but aren't really doing anything. You've got a bunch of folks in the middle who are quite neutral. You have some folks who don't really agree with you, but they're not prepared to do anything to stop you. And then you have a bunch of folks who are actively working against the goals that you have. So that's that's a very simplified approach to a spectrum of allies. But it's a great idea to think about when you're setting up your tactic, which group here or which groups are you aiming to persuade to change positions? Do you want the people who are agreeing with you to get up off their seats and join in? Do you want the people who are disagreeing with you to feel like they should stop disagreeing with you? And then you'll have to try and adjust your tactic accordingly. So related to that, related to the spectrum of allies is your audience. When you have figured out who you're trying to move on the spectrum of allies, then you're going to need to consider your audience. Like, within that, there may be a large subsection. So if you are trying to talk to a bunch of people who care about trying to stop air pollution, for example, there are a lot of people that don't want to breathe dirty air. But actually, there are so many that you can break it down into a subsection. Do you want to talk to teachers who are worried about the children in their schools breathing dirty air? Because then you can craft your message in a much more specific and targeted way. And if you could get the teachers all standing up From being people who agree with you to being people who actively work with you, you might develop a really powerful ally and bring them in a much stronger way. Then the next point in the action star is the story. And this is sort of related back to your campaign last week because you're telling a larger narrative. But the tactic that you choose is always going to link into that much larger narrative. When you choose a tactic, you have to think about what came before it and what will come after it. It's almost never a good idea to try and organize one protest that stands by itself. In my opinion, I think a lot of campaign groups fall into this trap because it's very easy to put energy and effort and excitement into one event without seeing that this event will follow on to another or has come from a previous event. So really try and consider the broader campaign story when you're building your tactics. What will come after this tactic? If we use this tactic to talk to our campaign target and we win, what's the action, what's the event that we will use to celebrate that and to make sure that the win is actually cemented and concrete and real? And if we use this tactic and they ignore us, what will we do to escalate that strategy? What will we do to escalate that story? If they engage with us after this tactic, what will we do if they tell us, that they don't want, that they disagree with us and that they're just going to keep doing what they're doing? There are lots of kind of outcomes and there are lots of ways that you can move the story, but when you're planning a tactic, it's really great to think like, this tactic will take us on to the next one. And it's always nice to plan actions and to plan tactics, a couple of tactics in advance. Start to try and play the campaign chess game and see if you can predict the moves of the people that are working against you, so that you can try and think, right, if this tactic fails, we'll move to the next tactic here. Okay, so the next part of the action star is talking to people's values. We know that a lot of the time we are not really talking to people based on facts, we're not talking to people based on science, we know that we're talking to people based on their values and the things that we have in common with each other. So if you can try and design your tactic around a value that we all have in common and create a mood as part of the story that will actually bring people to see that there is common sense here, that there is common ground and that there are common values, it's going to be much easier to persuade people to act in the way that you're trying to get them to do, whether that's to sign a petition or send a letter to a person in power. If they feel like what you're saying is actually grounded in values and not grounded in some scientific report which most people dismiss mentally very quickly. So lastly, there's this thing in the action style which is called building and tending the group. And I might use a different word for that. I might call that regenerative culture, because when you're the people that move first and when you're the people that step outside the rules a little bit to try and make things better for other people, you make yourself into a bit of a target, and that can be quite hard. That can be quite hard on your group, and lots of people for different reasons will denounce you and say that what you're doing is crazy and the wrong thing. There are very powerful interests often working on the other end of the spectrum to try and make life feel hard for you. And so it's really, really important that we take care of each other, that we are nice to each other, that we remember that we're friends, and that the guys that you're stepping out to do your campaign with are your best friends, radical friendships that allow you to change the world and allow you to actually make things better for everybody. But that, like any relationship, needs care and it needs work. And it's very, very easy in the world of activism to think it's so important that we just keep going. We have to get to that next action. We're failing, or if we just do this next thing, then maybe we can get over the edge. It's very easy to keep putting that pressure on yourself and keep putting that pressure on your group without taking time to dance, relax, sing, and just remember to be nice to each other and breathe. Take those moments where you actually sit down and try and sort of take care of each other and see about the things that haven't gone so well, because there will definitely be things that you don't do so well. That's like all of us do things, that all of us make mistakes all the time, and to try and just say sorry for the mistakes that we make, and to see how we can stop ourselves making those same mistakes at the next tactic or the next part of the campaign, to try and pick each other up and carry each other forward so that nobody feels like they're being left out and left behind, and so that we can keep growing your campaign and our movement together, and keep bringing people along the ride for justice. So something that we definitely need to think about when we're thinking about choosing our tactics and choosing them in terms of how appropriate they are and where we'd like to use them is a strategy of escalation. So you're not going to roll in on your first day with hundreds of thousands of people storming the parliament to demand policy change, because a campaign has never started like that in all of history. You're going to need to start with however many of you've got sitting in that room, your friends, trying to work out what the first thing you can do to make your campaign a little bit visible is. And again there, you have to think about the mood and the tone. Do you want to come out and be incredibly militant? Maybe you do. Maybe that is the right way to get attention and set the tone for the campaign that you hope to build. But maybe the first thing that you want to do is just get out into the streets, write some opinion articles in the media, maybe start a petition, see if you can gauge the level of public support, and try and build your tactics through a process of escalation. So it makes sense to anybody who's following the campaign that, hey, last year these guys were marching in the streets with 5,000 people. This year they're marching in the streets with 10,000 people. And nobody's really listening to them, so now they're going to start putting up banners in front of the people in power, and now they're going to start trying to get into the conferences of the people in power and start shouting at them and being more direct with their tactics. So that's a possibility. And this is where we start to see the line of civil disobedience being breached. So doing civil disobedience is an incredibly serious thing. It needs to be considered. If you are going to start breaking the rules of the society that you're in, it's something that takes quite some thought and quite some justification. Some people will always feel as though breaking the rules is wrong and even violent, even if you are completely peaceful when you do it. So you need to be able to justify to yourself and to the broader society that you're talking to why it is that you think breaking the rules is a necessary thing to do. Why is that the action logic that will help you to achieve the campaign as best as possible? And why is that something that is appropriate at this stage in the campaign? How have you shown that you have tried to use all of the rules that you can in order to get to the point where you feel as though civil disobedience is a tool that might help you to achieve the campaign goal? And when you get to the point where you're ready to use civil disobedience, again, there are a whole range of options. Are you going to interrupt somebody's speech when they're speaking and be thrown out of a speech? Are you going to, is that civil disobedience? Maybe it is in your society. Maybe you're not allowed to interrupt people speaking. Maybe the next step is to sit down and try and block a doorway. You're not really hurting anybody by sitting down and blocking a doorway, but the images of you getting dragged away might be an image that you can use to show the strength of conviction in your campaign. That you're sitting there trying to block a doorway might not make sense. Let's remember action logic. So if you're sitting in front of a doorway, let's make sure it's the right doorway at the right time with the right message so that people understand that this is actually a direct way for you to help your campaign. I don't know where your limits are or what makes sense, but it's definitely something that you have to consider incredibly carefully. When you step outside the law, there are going to be consequences. You should be as informed and aware of the consequences of which laws that you think you're going to break. Try and talk to all of the lawyers and all of the other campaign groups that have used tactics like this in your legal system before you, and try and gather as much wisdom as you can before you start taking those kind of steps, because this is something that's not to be taken lightly. So we're going to escalate. Perhaps you never need to use civil disobedience. Perhaps you can just start interrupting speeches and keep interrupting speeches, and that's enough. Perhaps that's legal, and perhaps that's all you need to do in order to keep your message getting across. Perhaps you never need to break the law. But definitely think about how you're going to escalate and de-escalate your tactics along the story that you're trying to tell in your campaign. So finally, we need to think about an exit strategy. if you start a campaign, you have to have a feeling about where you're going to be at the end of it. How will you know that you've won? Probably talked about this when you were looking at your campaign strategy last week. How do you know that you've won? How do you measure that you've won? How do you make sure that the people who commit to change actually deliver that change? But you need some tactics to go around with that too. And so when you're planning your tactics to bring the campaign to life, make sure you have some tactics that will allow you to keep escalating to the point where you do win, and that you have the stamina and the resources to make sure that you can deliver those tactics. And make sure that when you do win, you have a plan for a couple of tactics just to follow it up, because the end is never the end. And it's always good to make sure that you have those next steps ready for the group to keep the pressure on. Really, really fundamental stuff to any campaign, this tactics stuff, and I look forward to seeing the tactics that you come out with in real life.
Thank you for watching week 4 of the Changemakers Academy's ongoing series on campaign strategy. If you want to learn more about any of the topics discussed, please check out the links in the description below. And as always, please join our online community and Facebook group where you can interact with other changemakers and delve deeper in how to build up strong campaigns. I'll see you next week.